Welcome to this little tutorial. Today is an Octatrack only day. It was requested in the comments that I should make a beat with just the Octatrack, and I thought, okay, maybe that's a good opportunity to show some workflows that you can apply when working with just samples loaded from the disk. There's a lot of editing possibilities, so I'm not trying to make a super awesome song with everything pre-made. I'm just trying to make it on the spot while applying techniques that I would use in a normal production. The things I will go through are just normal working with one-shots, using multiple samples on a single track, and slicing, editing, start times, and also retriggering. So these are like 4 common tools to work with samples. Yeah, I think that's gonna be most interesting, especially for beginners. So yeah, let's get to it. Very basic house loop. And there already are a couple of parts here that are interesting, so let me show you. First we got the kick. It's pretty standard, 4 to the floor. I got a offbeat kick here that happens every 6th run through the bars. In this menu they're not obvious to find, but if you know a Digitakt or something like that, then you know about conditional triggers. There have been added to Octatrack, and are a very important tool to keep things moving and interesting while not working with more than 16 steps like I do most of the time. So what you do is you just place a trigger, and now it keeps playing every time, of course. So you hold it down and then you press the left key, and then you get into micro timing. Well, that's what it used to be before they added the trig conditions here. So it was just for nudging the trigger to left or right. As you can see now, it's placed here, but it sounds more like it's in between here because it's micro shifted more towards the number 9. So yeah, but that's not what we were after. Default is it's on grid, and now here it says trig condition and then embraces LEV. That means the level knob is to be used to change that function. So we just turn this knob here, and there are a couple of things. Fill, and then with a dash O, that means with a dash on the top means that if fill isn't used. And yeah, there's a couple like first time and neighbor and so on. So there's a couple of modes. You can read all of that in the manual. But what I find most interesting is here the percentage. That means it's the probability that goes up to 100. Yeah, usually good numbers are below 25, I find, because it keeps iterating over. It's just 16 steps, so the chances are much higher, even at 20%, that it's triggered. And then if you use it for example vocal steps or something, just a little fluff here and there, it happens too frequent even at those low percentages. What else you can do is, if you dial even higher, then you get into these bar counters, or so to speak. So it says 1/2, 2/2, 1/3, 2/3, and now because it says over 3, we can also get to 3/3, and 1/4, and up to 4/4. So what this means is the last number is the number of cycles the sequence is running. So this basically means at the first cycle of 2 cycles in total, the trigger should be fired, and otherwise it is skipped. And 1/4, or like let's say 2/4, means that when you start the sequence, The first loop, it will be skipped. The second loop, it will be triggered. Then the third loop, it will be skipped. And the fourth loop, it will be skipped as well. And then it starts over, counting from 1. And then it's the first loop again, skipped. And then we're back at the second. So it goes 4 times. And at this second time, it triggers. That's what this means. And it goes up to 1/8. So that does not mean you have to wait 8 cycles for it to hit. If you set it to 1, that means when you start the sequence, it's the first iteration and then it's triggered. And now you gotta wait 7 more cycles before it gets triggered. And no, I think no, next one. Yeah. Okay, so that's basically trick conditions. They're very powerful to spice things up and make it less stale. And I like to use trick conditions over long sequences because it makes it easier to manage. Now the next part here, it's a synthesizer sample. It's actually a long loop if we look at it. And you can see it goes back and forth here like crazy. And that's because I used the slice functionality on this sample. When you go into the AED, it also says slice grid, AED mode, then you come into this sample edit mode basically, where you can set some attributes like how loud the gain is of this sample, if there's a loop mode, time stretching is enabled, all those core settings here, and then also the length and so on. So, but we want to go to slice mode. That is here the AMP page, and you have to press yes to get to a submenu on this mode. So the trim, for example, when you press yes, has different options than on the slice page. So let me delete all slices here. Okay, so back to our sample page. So press yes to get to that submenu, and then is here an option called create slice grid, and then it asks you how many slices do you want, and depends how many make sense. For example, I measure it by just looking where the cursor is going to. I can see that it doesn't go much farther than like 20%. So I would say I could easily put in 32 or even 84 slices. Press yes, create slice grid, and set 64 if I want. But let's go with 32, that should be enough. So now it just measures how long is the sample and adds 32 positions or locks at the sample. Okay, so now let's play some triggers. And the start of the sample is empty. So of course we don't hear anything. And now it's a cool thing that you can do if you go into the AED mode. Let's zoom out a bit again. And you press yes. Then there's another create function that's called create random locks. So if I press random locks, that means it will set random parameter locks on every step that is currently highlighted, which is why I place them so randomly. And now when I confirm this, it will just assign slices to these highlighted steps. Are you sure? Yes. Now you can see how it's just scanning the WAV file basically. Let's try it again. And again. And like that, I used a stock sample to make it more interesting, using what the Octatrack has to offer. Now combine that with the kick and see if it sounds good. Alright. Now we can go further and maybe add a nice reverb to it. And if we at one point decide like, okay, this is still boring somehow, we can always go back here and create random locks. Alright, so what else do we have? We now learned about probability and slices. So on the next part here, I think there's just some vocal that's happened randomly. So let's check it out. It's set to 19%. Okay. Let's see how it sounds like. Together with the other parts. Let's use some parameter locking. Okay, what I just did was using the Retrigger function. That's the parameter at the bottom here. And it repeats in a certain interval. The interval can be set with the retrig time. It's rtim here. And 1.0 means one step. So if you have to see it like 4 steps or 4 repeats. Let me demonstrate this here at number 1. So the rtrim time, retrig time is now at 1. By default, the retrig is set to 1. So basically we are using retriggering all the time, just once. Now what happens when I increase the number? It goes to 9. And if I half that, let's say 8, it only goes to 4. (16 to 8). So it's just a division, but it's a fraction value, so you can go crazy fast with it as well if you go below 1.0. And of course you can play with that. So this movement seems like a perfect candidate for using an LFO, which is another thing that I like to do when programming. So let's double tap the LFO on this track and find the parameter for the retrig time. And yeah, let's just see what happens if I increase the depth by 10. increase the speed to... by the way, I don't know if you know, but by default the speed is set to very low value. That means when you look at the multiplier, you think like, it's 1x, that means one complete sequence, one bar, so to speak. But that's not the case, because the speed is slower than the multiplier. You have to increase the speed to maximum, to 127. Only then it will make the full movement in that cycle. So as you can hear, it reaches the peak in the center and then declines at the end. Likewise, if I now lower the speed, I will move the peak further to the back. And of course it carries over to the beginning, because the trigger is not synced. There are various sync modes. You can look them up, what they all do. But what they are doing here is to make sure that it starts on the trigger and then does the movement, so I can be certain to have the peak value that I set in depth at a certain point that I like. Okay, another cool thing I think we could even add on to that, because we have 3 LFOs. So maybe it would be cool to increase the depth while having this LFO in that set movement, that the peak is kind of in this area around 11 to 14. But the number of repeats is determined by the depth of the LFO. So when it reached the peak value, whatever it is at that point, that's the amount of retriggers that we are getting. So we can stack LFOs like this when we say the second LFO should control the depth of the first LFO, LFO depth 1. So let's play with that. Increase the multiplier. And this is pretty cool, actually. I mean, all we have is one trigger, 2 LFOs, and we got something that is alive. It's not so static, and we still only use 16 steps. These are the kind of things that I'm usually after when programming the Octatrack or the Digitakt. I try to use trig conditions and all that stuff to make it really compact, and so I only have to work with that. I'm a 16-step guy, can't help myself. So I use all these workarounds. Okay, so okay, I find that this part no longer works, which happens, but it's no problem. We just switch it out with something else. A nice little shortcut that you can do is when you double tap and you are in this source setup page, and you can see the slot here. On any slot, just right now it's highlighted. You don't have to go into the browser. You just hold down function and then you press left or right, and the slot is replaced with a neighboring sample in that direction you are going within the current directory. So I don't know what I actually selected, but let's hear it. Okay, sounds a little bit busy, but I do like the step that I just found here. So let's mute this LFO part. I mean, it was for demonstration anyway. So another thing I wanted to go back at is, now that I switched the slot, you could hear that it's not really playing in whatever the sample is, in that it still has the performance informations for the slices. So when we look at the AED, you can still see it's still scanning, even though the sample isn't sliced. And that basically gives you a lot of happy accidents when you're just scanning through a couple of samples and you have set it up in a way like this with parameter locking, and then just see what happens while still staying in rhythm in your BPM. And of course we can now reapply slices here, create slice grid. And now it's no longer following the slices from the previous sample. They were in a different position because the sample that was previously loaded was a bit longer. This one is shorter, so it jumps even further front and back, whatever slice is locked here. And that's why it sounds different now. But I'm not complaining. I like it. So here on this track I got just some basic offbeat hi-hat, nothing special. I just selected a sample, and this is like how you would work on a normal sample drum computer, whatever, or Digitakt. You don't always have to be fancy. If you have tracks left, why not? Okay, we're close to hitting 30 minutes on this video, so just let me show you one more thing. Let's suppose we have all the tracks used. We also have master track enabled, so that means we're by default down to 7 tracks. So what are we going to do? What you can do is using sample locking, and that's the fourth technique that I'm going to show you. So this was just the offbeat hi-hat here. I removed the triggers for that because I need this track now free for something more important or more awesome. So what I'm going to do is I look for a track that does not use the steps. And here we can see, oh, they're in between steps here, they're free. Nothing is programmed. So theoretically, we can map the sample here if we are okay with having certain settings here shared with them. For example, I could not add now a reverb on a hi-hat because I'm now using the kick track, and a reverb would be a pretty bad idea. So what I'm doing now is I just place the samples here, or actually I can show you another workflow trick. I'm just working now with one trigger. I'm holding it down, and then you move the level knob here, and that brings up a lock static screen, and that shows you all slots that are populated. And you can see here I got a couple of things going on, and here's my head, and that's all I need to do. You see it's flashing because it's parameter locked. And now I hold it down and press copy, and then you can see it says copy trig. And now I go to the next one and just press paste, and now the locked sample is copied over, and I don't have to select it more than once. Now if you mute the other parts, everything is muted, and you can hear there's 2 samples on one track. Now of course I could also work with the sample like I would be able to on any normal track. For example, I can change the pitch. I can also use Retrig. So now I used so let's make 2. There's one thing that you have to keep in mind, and when you use this technique, you have to be aware that Octatrack is monophonic on each track. So if something else is triggered on the same track, everything that was running before that is muted. So even though I've set here the Retrig to 24, and we would expect to have it heard like 24 times now, it doesn't. It cuts here. And that's why setting it like this is useless. For that little dragged out hi-hat here, I just set it to 2 because that's the maximum steps that I have left where you could hear the sound anyway. So I like it like that. So copy, paste, paste, paste. And now I got a modified sample locked on a shared on the same track as something else. Alright, let's wrap it up here. I hope you liked this video, learned a few things and tricks, and yeah, leave a like if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't, and yeah, if you have ideas for another tutorial or the next video, just let me know and I will see what I can do about it. So as always, see you in the next one.